What if Meghan Markle's most guarded secret was accidentally exposed, not by a tabloid, but by her ex-boyfriend's mother? In a stunning twist during a casual podcast appearance, celebrity chef Cory Vitiello reveals that his mother, Joanne, walked in on Meghan Markle mid-sex video chat with another man inside Cory's own bedroom. This jaw-dropping moment, hidden for years, now threatens to unravel everything we thought we knew about Meghan's pre-royal life. Why was it kept secret? Who was the mysterious caller? And what does this reveal about the real Meghan Markle? Stay with us. We're breaking down the full story, the timeline, and the cover-up you were never supposed to hear about. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started like any other podcast appearance, a relaxed setting, a familiar face, a routine conversation. But somewhere in the second half of Cory Vitiello's candid sit-down on a rising Canadian lifestyle show, a bombshell dropped so hard that it immediately caused a storm on social media, news blogs, and among royal watchers worldwide. What began as a culinary career catch-up quickly spiraled into a confession, one that many had speculated about for years, but never expected to hear come from Cory himself. And the moment it landed, it lit a fire under a rumor that has been haunting Meghan Markle since the very beginning of her public life. That her carefully constructed image hides something far more calculated and controversial than anyone had dared to imagine. There are scandals, and then there are incidents that redefine how the public views a person entirely. What Cory revealed, casually, even nervously, was one of the latter. A moment, he claimed, when his mother, Joanne Vitiello, walked in on Meghan Markle during what can only be described as a sexually explicit video chat with an unknown man inside his private room, while they were still dating and living together. It wasn't hearsay. It wasn't tabloid conjecture. According to Cory, it was firsthand, it was real, and it left a scar on his family that has never truly healed. And just like that, an old chapter in Meghan Markle's life, long buried and conveniently overshadowed by her royal transition, burst back into the spotlight, raw and unfiltered. But the story doesn't stop at just that shocking moment. It pulls us deeper into a timeline full of hidden friction, uncomfortable dynamics, secret messages, and an alleged pattern of behavior that now casts new doubt on her history, her values, and perhaps even her royal ambitions. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To fully understand the gravity of this revelation, we have to rewind. We have to revisit the time before the tiaras, before the Sussex drama, before the international interviews and Netflix deals. We need to return to Toronto in the mid-2010s, a time when Meghan Markle was just a rising star on the television show Suits, dating a respected chef and beloved son of a tight-knit Canadian family. It was here, not behind palace gates or in high-profile settings, that the first cracks allegedly began to form in Meghan's public facade. Cory Vitiello wasn't just another boyfriend. He was someone Meghan moved in with. He introduced her to his family. His mother, Joanne, by all accounts, treated Meghan like one of their own. They welcomed her into their home, into their lives. Meghan reportedly played the part perfectly, charming, polite, seemingly grateful. But behind the smiles, something far more complicated may have been unfolding. That alleged night when Joanne opened the door to find Meghan engaging in an intimate video conversation with another man, who was not Cory, was not just a breach of trust. It was a moment that, as Cory now reveals, shook the very foundation of their family's perception of her. Imagine being in Joanne's position. The woman your son loves and lives with is, unbeknownst to him, having a sexually charged exchange with someone else, right in his bedroom. According to Cory, his mother's confrontation with Meghan was met with shock, denial, and ultimately, a quick retreat into silence. And that silence, according to Vitiello, lasted for years. Whether it was out of fear, embarrassment, or legal pressure, the family chose not to speak out. But now, with everything that has transpired in the public eye, from Meghan's dramatic royal exit to the mounting controversies surrounding her personal narrative, it seems the time for silence is over. Why now? That's the question everyone has been asking since the podcast aired. Was Cory finally fed up with the narrative being sold to the world? Did he feel betrayed by how easily Meghan seemed to move on, launching into a globally publicized relationship with Prince Harry just months after leaving his life behind? Or was it something else? A moment of catharsis? An attempt to clear the air? Perhaps even a warning? What makes this revelation even more captivating is how well it aligns with older, quieter rumors that floated around entertainment and social circles during Meghan's time in Toronto. Whispers of secret calls, controlling behavior, an obsessive focus on status and power. No one ever went on the record. Until now. And Cory didn't just speak, he painted a scene. A scene that millions can now vividly imagine, and one that many argue irrevocably alters how we perceive the woman who now carries royal titles and sits across from Oprah Winfrey to talk about truth and integrity. But it's not just Meghan's reputation that's on the line here. There's a broader ripple effect. Cory's mother, Joanne, is now being thrust into the spotlight, a woman who, until now, remained private, supportive of her son, and hesitant to engage the media circus. Her side of the story, while not yet directly told in her own voice, is beginning to emerge through corroborated conversations and off-the-record confirmations from close friends of the Vitiello family. And what's being hinted at paints a picture of shock, disappointment, and ultimately, resolve. Then there's the mystery man, someone on the other end of that intimate video call. Who was he? How long had it been going on? Was he someone Meghan had known for years, or was he someone new? Did he know she was in a committed relationship? Was it a fling? Or something more sinister, a transaction, perhaps? These are the questions swirling around, each one more disturbing than the last. And perhaps most importantly, what does this all mean now? In 2025, when Meghan and Harry are facing increasing scrutiny, questions about their finances, their children's legitimacy, and their public personas, this revelation couldn't come at a more critical time. Are we seeing the slow unraveling of a constructed identity? Or is this just another attempt by a bitter ex to get attention? The audience is split, but the evidence, the consistency of Cory's account, and the decades-long silence broken at last suggests something much deeper. In the sections ahead, we will break down every layer of this scandal. We will walk through the early days of Meghan and Cory's relationship and explore how this shocking incident reshaped both of their lives. We will dissect Cory's podcast appearance and the exact words that sent shockwaves through media channels. We'll explore the emotional and moral implications of being caught in such a moment. We'll investigate the identity of the so-called gentleman caller. We'll uncover whether this was an isolated case or part of a pattern that has long gone ignored. And finally, we'll assess the lasting consequences on Meghan's brand, her marriage, and her legacy. The story ahead is not for the faint-hearted. It is complex, uncomfortable, and shrouded in personal pain. But it's also essential, because it challenges the narrative that has been carefully sculpted for years. And it demands that we ask ourselves an important question. When does image stop being protection and start becoming deception? So, buckle in. This isn't just another scandal. It's a window into a moment that changed lives, shattered illusions, and possibly exposed the beginning of a very carefully hidden pattern. If you thought you knew everything about Meghan Markle's past, prepare to rethink it all. Before Meghan Markle was a duchess, before she stood next to Queen Elizabeth, before she shook hands with presidents and sat with Oprah in a garden bathed in filtered light, she was simply Meghan, an actress trying to break out of supporting roles and make a name for herself. And during that crucial period of her life, while she was based in Toronto filming Suits, one man stood by her side, Cory Vitiello. To fully understand the weight of his recent revelation, we have to know who Cory is, not just by name, but by substance, character, and his place in the chapter of Meghan's life that came before royalty. Cory Vitiello isn't a Hollywood figure. He's not a political personality or a media provocateur. He's a chef, a real one who built his name the hard way, through sweat, craft, and patience. Born and raised in Ontario, Cory's culinary passion sparked early. By his teens, he was already playing with recipes, obsessed with flavors, technique, and presentation. Unlike many of his peers who rushed toward TV gigs and sponsorships, Cory took the long road. He studied at Stratford Chef School, one of Canada's most respected culinary institutions. His early career was defined by discipline and a commitment to doing things right. His rise was steady, not viral. And in the industry, that sort of progression earns respect. He made a name for himself with his popular restaurant, the Harbord Room, in Toronto, a venue that quickly became a favorite among locals and celebrities alike. Not flashy, not loud, just reliable, delicious, and grounded. It wasn't just about food. The Harbord Room represented everything Cory was: focused, quietly ambitious, respectful of tradition, and serious about his work. He became something of a food ambassador in Canada, hosting events, doing charity work, and building bridges between culinary culture and the broader public. So how did someone like Cory end up with someone like Meghan Markle? Their meeting, according to people close to both, was serendipitous. Meghan, then filming Suits, was invited to a dinner party hosted by mutual friends. She was new to Toronto, still adjusting to her schedule and her visibility in Canada. Cory, already well-known in local social circles, was attending as the night's guest chef. There wasn't instant fire or a tabloid-worthy encounter. It was a slow burn built on conversations, shared passions, and a surprising compatibility between two people from different worlds. Cory was grounded. Meghan was aspirational. He was quiet, she was expressive. And for a time, they complemented each other. Within months, their relationship became serious. Meghan moved into Cory's home. She began integrating with his family. According to friends, she spoke fondly of his mother, Joanne, and frequently attended family functions. The Vitiellos, by most accounts, were charmed by her warmth, ambition, and energy. Joanne in particular seemed to embrace her. In those days, Meghan presented herself as someone who appreciated real family bonds, community, and domestic comfort. She often posted pictures of homemade meals, rustic kitchens, and cozy dinner nights on her now-deleted blog, The Tig. Much of that inspiration came directly from her time with Cory. She observed his lifestyle, the slow food, the mindful routines, the way he prioritized relationships over appearances. And she was clearly drawn to it. But something deeper may have been at play, something that only in hindsight becomes more visible. People close to Cory say he was serious about the relationship. He wasn't interested in the Hollywood life or becoming a celebrity couple. In fact, he reportedly resisted many offers to commercialize their connection. When bloggers and gossip sites speculated about the two of them, he declined interviews. He wanted privacy. He wanted authenticity. Meghan, according to those same sources, was beginning to want something else. Fame, influence, visibility beyond the world of cable TV. And that divergence, slow and subtle, began to create tension. While Cory remained rooted in his restaurant ventures, Meghan was increasingly drawn into branding opportunities, high-profile networking events, and online visibility. She began attending more red carpet events without Cory. She ramped up the Tig, crafting a polished version of herself that leaned into aspirational womanhood, complete with product endorsements, lifestyle tips, and personal reflections that many now describe as carefully curated. Cory didn't seem to mind, at least not at first. He supported her ambitions. He spoke highly of her to friends and never once made public statements to challenge her rising profile. But behind closed doors, it's now clear that cracks were forming. Friends say Cory grew uneasy with Meghan's changing behavior, the late-night phone calls, the sudden privacy around her devices, and the unexplained absences. But still, he didn't confront her. Not until his mother Joanne, the same woman who had welcomed Meghan like a daughter, stumbled upon something that would change everything. It's here, in the quiet corridors of the Vitiello home, that this love story took a turn. What was once a warm, grounded romance began to unravel in the most dramatic way imaginable. Meghan, according to Cory, had made herself comfortable in his space, using his room as her sanctuary. But what she chose to do in that room when Cory wasn't around, and what Joanne witnessed, has now exploded into public consciousness years later. The incident, as Cory described it in the recent podcast, was unexpected and humiliating. His mother, unaware of what she was walking into, opened the door thinking she would simply tell Meghan dinner was ready. What she saw instead was Meghan mid-call, half-dressed, speaking to an unknown man in a suggestive manner. According to Cory, Joanne didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. She simply closed the door. And later that night, she told her son everything. For Cory, the revelation was devastating. He had built his life around honesty, hard work, and loyalty, values instilled in him by his parents. Meghan's betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was a violation of the trust his family had offered so freely. But even then, even after being told what had happened, Cory didn't go public. He didn't leak the story. He didn't talk to the press. He did what many decent people would do. He tried to process it privately, to end the relationship quietly, and to preserve the dignity of everyone involved. And for years, it worked. Nobody knew the truth. The public simply believed the two had broken up due to scheduling conflicts or growing apart. Meghan quickly moved on, soon appearing on the radar of one of the world's most eligible royals, Prince Harry. The world cheered her rise. Few stopped to ask why someone like Cory, grounded, respected, and deeply connected to her during a pivotal time in her life, was suddenly and completely erased from her narrative. Now, with his podcast appearance, that silence has ended. But why did Cory choose to speak now? And more importantly, why in such a casual, almost offhand manner? According to the host, Cory had initially agreed to appear simply to promote a new food venture. The conversation drifted into personal memories. When Meghan's name came up, Cory didn't deflect. He paused, smiled uneasily, and began telling the story. There was no visible anger, no resentment, just a quiet acknowledgement of a painful truth that had remained hidden for too long. And in that moment, Cory Vitiello reminded the world that sometimes the most credible stories come not from tabloids or explosive headlines, but from people who have nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling the truth. His account wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't dramatic. It was human, honest, raw. For many, Cory's integrity stands in sharp contrast to the world Meghan Markle now occupies, one defined by media control, image management, and carefully constructed narratives. Whether you believe every detail or not, one thing is clear: Cory isn't interested in destroying Meghan. He's interested in reclaiming his truth. And in doing so, he's invited us all to re-examine what we think we know about her rise to power. As the next sections unfold, we will explore exactly how this story developed, what Joanne Vitiello saw that night, how the relationship ended, and what secrets may still be hidden behind the walls of that quiet Toronto home. By the time Meghan Markle moved in with Cory Vitiello, their relationship had already become one of the most whispered about pairings in Toronto's social and entertainment circles. While not public in the conventional celebrity sense, no red carpet hand-holding or splashy magazine spreads, their coupling was quietly acknowledged by insiders. Meghan, then starring as Rachel Zane on Suits, had quickly gone from newcomer to local favorite. And Cory, a respected culinary figure with his own circle of admirers, was seen as the perfect partner: handsome, articulate, grounded, and successful. Together, they exuded the image of a modern power couple in the making. But the move-in marked a major turning point in both their lives. What had started as casual companionship began to take on the rhythms of something more permanent. Or so it seemed. The decision for Meghan to move into Cory's home wasn't announced or photographed. It happened gradually, according to friends. Meghan, who had been splitting her time between a modest rental and hotel stays during the early Suits days, started spending more nights at Cory's place. First a few clothes in his closet, then a toothbrush in the bathroom. Over time, those small imprints of her presence grew, until they were indistinguishable from permanent residency. Within months, she had effectively moved in. Cory's home wasn't some celebrity fortress. It was warm, inviting, and lived in. A townhouse with character, bookshelves filled with cookbooks, subtle design accents reflecting his appreciation for form and function, and a kitchen that was clearly the heart of the home. It was the kind of place where meals were shared slowly, where wine was poured in mismatched glasses, and where phones were often left face down during conversation. For Meghan, it represented a stable contrast to the fast-paced and image-obsessed environment of Hollywood. And initially, she embraced it. Friends and neighbors who saw them together during this period describe a couple that seemed genuinely happy. Meghan attended events with Cory when appropriate, hosted low-key dinners at home, and even became friendly with some of Cory's extended family. She was, reportedly, warm and engaging with his parents. Joanne, his mother, found Meghan charming and was known to speak fondly of her presence in the house. It seemed, from the outside, like things were moving towards something long-term. Cory, never one to seek public attention, wasn't rushing to put a ring on it. But those around him say he was deeply committed and believed the relationship had real potential. But beneath the surface, subtle signs of divergence were beginning to show. While Cory remained devoted to the rhythms of the culinary world, long hours at the restaurant, early mornings at the market, evenings filled with tastings and consultations, Meghan's ambitions were shifting. Her role on Suits had provided her with stability and visibility, but she was already thinking beyond acting. She began investing more time into personal branding. Her blog, The Tig, which began as a side project for creative expression, was evolving into something far more curated. Posts featured fashion tips, travel narratives, reflections on social justice, and interviews with women of influence. The language of her posts began to reflect someone aiming for a more elevated status, a lifestyle influencer, not just an actress. Meghan's interests began to include yoga retreats, upscale wellness experiences, and social events that introduced her to people in the media, fashion, and political realms. According to several acquaintances, she was intentional in her networking, always seeking connections with individuals who could help elevate her presence beyond the realm of Canadian television. There's nothing inherently wrong with ambition, of course. But as her visibility grew, so too did the divide between her world and Cory's. While Cory continued to build his restaurant empire in Canada, exploring new locations and hosting food-centered charity events, Meghan was increasingly seen flying out of town for interviews, conferences, and private events. Sources say she began to view Toronto as a stepping stone, not a destination. It wasn't that she no longer respected Cory's world. It was that she was quickly outgrowing it, at least in her own mind. Cory, ever the composed and introspective type, seemed to understand the shift on some level. But he didn't push back. He gave Meghan space, supported her endeavors, and respected her independence. Yet, those close to him say he sometimes wondered whether he was being slowly edged out of the narrative she was building for herself. Her blog, once filled with anecdotes from their shared meals and experiences, began referencing more solo adventures. She was changing, or perhaps she was revealing more of who she had always been. Things came to a head in the quiet moments, those seemingly insignificant interactions that, when pieced together, reveal the slow decay of intimacy. Meghan, once quick to join Cory in his weekend routines, began to decline. Dinner together became less frequent. She would take calls in private, retreat to their bedroom for extended video chats, or suddenly excuse herself to handle a work thing. Cory noticed the change, but still, he didn't confront her. At least not until his mother did. It's important to understand just how close Joanne Vitiello was to her son. A retired schoolteacher, Joanne was known in her community as thoughtful and kind, but also deeply perceptive. She had always maintained a respectful distance in Cory's relationships, but Meghan's presence in their household had created a new kind of dynamic. Joanne had grown to care for Meghan, not as a celebrity, but as someone she believed was becoming part of their family. That's what made the discovery so jarring. One evening, while helping prepare dinner, Joanne noticed that Meghan had disappeared for an extended period. Assuming she had gone upstairs to rest or take a quick call, Joanne went to let her know that dinner was almost ready. What happened next would leave an imprint on her memory forever. According to Cory's account, Joanne opened the bedroom door, not expecting anything unusual, only to find Meghan engaged in what she quickly realized was a sexually suggestive video chat. The image of Meghan, half-dressed, speaking flirtatiously and explicitly with a man on the other end of the screen, was not something she had ever anticipated encountering. She quietly closed the door and walked away. Joanne didn't confront Meghan immediately. Instead, she spoke to Cory later that evening carefully, gently, but honestly. She told him what she had seen. Cory's response, by all accounts, was a mix of disbelief and devastation. He trusted Meghan. He believed in her. And most of all, he had assumed they were building something real together. The idea that she could be doing something so disrespectful and hurtful under his own roof, while being embraced by his family, was almost too much to process. Cory confronted Meghan the following day. He was calm but direct. Meghan, according to his account, was defensive at first. She denied the nature of the call, claiming it was a misunderstanding. She insisted the man on the other end was just a friend. But when pressed about the tone, the outfit, and the private nature of the call, her story began to fray. In the end, she apologized, not necessarily for the act itself, but for how it might have been interpreted. It was the kind of apology that left more questions than answers. The days that followed were filled with tension. Meghan remained in the house for a short time, but the relationship was clearly fractured. Cory, trying to maintain dignity and avoid public spectacle, asked her to move out. She did quietly and without much explanation. The public never knew the real reason. Articles at the time simply reported the breakup as mutual and drama-free. But behind closed doors, the Vitiello family was reeling. Joanne, once fond of Meghan, now felt betrayed. Cory, heartbroken and stunned, withdrew from the public eye for a while. He focused on his work, avoided the media, and refused all inquiries about the breakup. Meghan, for her part, went on to revamp her public image. She took a solo trip to India, wrote about female empowerment, and immersed herself deeper into the world of global humanitarianism. She gave interviews, launched campaigns, and positioned herself as a modern feminist voice. Then came Prince Harry. The speed with which Meghan transitioned into royal life stunned many of her acquaintances. Within months of dating Harry, she had shut down the TIG, erased much of her online history, and reinvented herself as a royal-to-be. For the Vitiello family, it was as if she had vanished. No acknowledgement, no closure, no reconciliation. Years passed. The scandal stayed buried. Cory never spoke. Joanne remained silent. Meghan's star continued to rise. Until now. The recent podcast appearance marked the first time Cory publicly spoke about their relationship in detail, and the first time he mentioned what his mother saw. While he didn't reveal everything, his quiet demeanor, his restrained language, and his authenticity left a deep impression on listeners. This wasn't tabloid sensationalism. This was a man unburdening a painful truth. As more people hear the story, more are beginning to piece together what may have happened during those last days of Meghan's relationship with Cory. And with that, the narrative she spent years carefully crafting is beginning to unravel, thread by thread. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, the kind of quiet, domestic night that characterized much of life in the Vitiello household. Cory was finishing up at the restaurant, preparing for the next day's menu, reviewing supply lists, and handling end-of-day paperwork. Joanne, his mother, had offered to help with dinner, as she often did when Meghan was around. Their evenings weren't lavish affairs, no catered meals, no extravagant social gatherings, just real food, real conversation, and a rhythm of life that felt safe, warm, and intimate. That evening, Joanne had prepared something simple and comforting: roasted chicken with rosemary, mashed potatoes, and seasonal vegetables. She had spent the better part of the late afternoon in the kitchen. Meghan had been home, quiet for most of the day. There were no raised voices, no visible arguments, no signs of tension. At least none that Joanne could pick up on. She remembered thinking Meghan seemed preoccupied, retreating upstairs earlier than usual and excusing herself for a work call. Joanne didn't think twice about it. After all, Meghan was still acting on Suits and had a growing portfolio of influencer-style commitments, blog drafts, interviews, brand consultations, and event planning. She often said her schedule was unpredictable, that she had to stay nimble. And the family accepted that. By 7:15 p.m., the food was ready. Cory still hadn't arrived from the restaurant, but Joanne assumed he'd be home shortly. Wanting to be courteous, she headed upstairs to let Meghan know that dinner would be on the table in a few minutes. Joanne wasn't the type to shout up the stairs. She believed in presence and face-to-face connection. It was part of her upbringing. So she walked softly, as she always did, approaching the guest bedroom, the one Meghan had been using more and more frequently. It was the sound that made her pause. Not yelling, not music, but a voice. Meghan's voice. Laughing, softly at first, then with more volume. It was flirtatious. There was a tone of intimacy, a rhythm that didn't fit the profile of a business call. Joanne wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something felt off. She hesitated at the door, unsure whether to knock or back away. But her instincts took over. She opened the door slowly, just enough to peek in, just enough to see. And what she saw froze her in place. Meghan was seated on the bed, legs crossed, wearing a loose shirt and little else. The laptop in front of her was open, angled slightly to the side. On the screen was the face of a man, unfamiliar, older, smiling. The conversation was unmistakably sensual. Meghan's voice dipped into a sultry register. Her posture was relaxed but provocative. She played with her hair. She whispered. She laughed in ways that were far too suggestive for anything professional. For a moment, Joanne couldn't move. She blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. Her son's girlfriend, the woman she had welcomed into her home, was engaging in an intimate video call with another man inside her son's bedroom. Then, as calmly as she could manage, Joanne closed the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't shout or confront Meghan. She walked down the stairs, placed the cloth she was holding on the kitchen counter, and sat down. Her hands trembled, not from rage, but from disbelief. From a deep, quiet sorrow that only comes when someone realizes they've misjudged a person they trusted. Joanne had grown to care for Meghan. She had defended her in conversations with skeptical relatives. She had cooked for her, offered her advice, and included her in family discussions. She had, in her heart, imagined a future where Meghan might one day be a daughter-in-law. And now, that illusion had been shattered with one accidental glance through a half-open door. She debated what to do next. Tell Cory? Confront Meghan directly? Say nothing? But Joanne was not the type to harbor secrets when it came to her son. That evening, when Cory returned home around 9 p.m., she sat him down after dinner and told him the truth. Every detail. She was calm, measured, and heartbreakingly disappointed. She didn't embellish or speculate. She simply described what she had seen and left the rest to him. Cory, understandably, was shocked. At first, he asked if Joanne was sure. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the context wasn't what it appeared to be. But Joanne, never one for drama or exaggeration, insisted on what she had witnessed. She described the man's face, the gestures, the suggestive language, everything. Cory was crushed. He didn't lash out. He didn't call Meghan down in anger. Instead, he took a walk. He needed time. Time to process what he had just heard. Time to think about the months they had spent together, the future they had discussed. He had loved Meghan. And now, he was forced to reconsider everything he thought he knew about her. The next day, Cory confronted Meghan directly. He didn't shout. He wasn't theatrical. He simply asked her to explain what had happened. Meghan's initial reaction was defensiveness. She claimed the man was a friend, that the conversation had been taken out of context. But as Cory pressed further, it became clear that her explanations were unraveling. She offered apologies, but they felt half-hearted. She shifted blame. She suggested Joanne had invaded her privacy. But Cory knew his mother. And he knew what trust looked like, what honesty sounded like. Meghan's response only deepened the wound. In the days that followed, things grew colder. Meghan became more withdrawn. The once warm conversations turned to short, clipped exchanges. Eventually, a decision was made: Meghan would leave. She packed her things and moved out within a week. There were no public statements, no explanations, just silence. To the outside world, it looked like a quiet breakup, a mutual parting of ways. The tabloids speculated on scheduling conflicts or the stress of long work hours. But no one knew the truth. No one, that is, until Cory decided to speak. Years passed. Joanne never mentioned the incident again, not to friends, not to neighbors, not even to extended family. It was a private pain, one she believed was best left buried. She didn't want to damage Meghan. She didn't want to draw attention to herself. But she also never forgot. It stayed with her, the betrayal, the awkwardness, the heartbreak of seeing her son blindsided by someone they had all trusted. When Cory made his now viral appearance on a podcast and finally referenced the incident, Joanne was surprised. She hadn't expected him to go public. But she understood. For years, he had carried the burden of silence. Now, he was simply telling the truth. And in doing so, he was reclaiming part of the story that had been erased from Meghan's public narrative. Listeners were stunned. The image of a dignified mother walking in on such a moment, quietly closing the door, and never speaking of it again, resonated deeply. It wasn't about salacious detail. It was about betrayal, about the dignity with which it had been handled, and the humanity of a family caught off guard by someone they trusted. The revelation sparked renewed interest in Meghan's past. Who was the man on the other end of the call? How long had it been going on? Was it part of a pattern? And most importantly, how much of Meghan's rise had been built on carefully hidden moments like this, moments sanitized for public consumption, quietly pushed aside to preserve her polished image? In the aftermath, Joanne remained out of the spotlight. She refused all interview requests. She did not issue statements. But sources close to the family say she felt a quiet sense of relief. Not because Meghan had been exposed, but because the truth had finally found light. After years of silence, the truth had finally caught up to the myth. This wasn't just a mother's discovery. It was a moment that unraveled the illusion Meghan had worked so hard to protect. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, ordinary, devastating. The man on the other end of the video call, his image briefly glimpsed on Cory Vitiello's laptop screen by a shocked Joanne Vitiello, has become the central mystery at the heart of this explosive revelation. Who was he? Why was Meghan Markle engaged in a sexually suggestive conversation with him inside her then-boyfriend's private bedroom? And more crucially, was this an isolated mistake, or part of a deeper, more troubling pattern of behavior? Cory Vitiello didn't name him. In the now infamous podcast episode, he only alluded to the situation as one of betrayal and heartbreak. He chose not to identify the man, perhaps because he didn't know who he was for certain, or perhaps because doing so would have opened legal doors that even a scorned ex wasn't willing to push through. But that hasn't stopped the speculation. And it hasn't stopped journalists, bloggers, and online sleuths from digging into Meghan's past, trying to connect the dots and match the pieces of a very murky puzzle. First, let's consider what little we know from the account. According to Joanne Vitiello, the man appeared older, professional, and relaxed. He wasn't surprised to see Meghan in a state of semi-undress. His facial expressions, demeanor, and conversation style indicated familiarity. This wasn't a one-off flirtation. It was intimate, comfortable, perhaps even habitual. That raises two possible scenarios. 1. This was a romantic affair with someone Meghan had an ongoing connection with, behind Cory's back. 2. This was a transactional interaction, something arranged, perhaps tied to financial gain or favors. The former is messy. The latter is explosive. To assess the first possibility, one has to explore Meghan's known connections during her time in Toronto in the years immediately prior. Meghan was known for networking aggressively, not just in the acting world, but in spheres of media, public relations, fashion, and politics. Her blog The Tig was often a vehicle to reach upward, featuring interviews with influential figures, shout-outs to lifestyle brands, and reflections that signaled a desire to elevate her position in public life. Several names have surfaced in speculative circles. One such name is that of a former media executive with ties to both the entertainment industry and the Canadian fashion scene. He's known to have attended several of the same events as Meghan, and mutual friends suggest they were close, very close, for a period overlapping with her relationship with Cory. This man, described by sources as charismatic and generous with his connections, has never spoken publicly about Meghan, but his name has quietly lingered in the background whenever discussions of her social rise are raised. According to one anonymous insider who worked at a Toronto media agency during that period, Meghan was frequently seen at VIP mixers and invite-only parties, events that Cory often did not attend. The insider noted that Meghan always seemed to be in strategic conversations, often with men significantly older than her, many of whom had influence over casting, media coverage, or brand deals. While there is no direct proof of anything inappropriate, the implications are hard to ignore when placed in the context of Joanne's shocking discovery. There's also speculation that the man may not have been Canadian at all. Meghan, after all, frequently traveled between Toronto, New York, and Los Angeles. Some believe the caller may have been someone from her Los Angeles circle, perhaps a figure from her early acting days who reappeared as she gained momentum. Reports from people familiar with Meghan's early career have suggested that she maintained relationships with a few powerful men in Hollywood, including casting directors and agents who helped her land gigs. One name that has emerged in hushed tones is a former executive producer on a cable network series, one who reportedly maintained contact with Meghan even after she transitioned to Suits. Of course, these are speculations. The man in question remains unidentified, but the pattern is worth examining. Meghan, by her own admission in interviews over the years, has said she worked hard to get noticed in a tough industry. She often emphasized her hustle, her ability to navigate difficult spaces, and her determination to rise above her humble beginnings. But others, particularly those who interacted with her off-screen, suggest that Meghan's rise wasn't just due to persistence and charm. It was calculated, strategic, and, at times, relying on personal relationships that blurred the line between professional and personal. Adding fuel to the fire is a resurfaced anecdote from an actress who worked briefly with Meghan on a small project prior to Suits. Speaking anonymously to a podcast in 2020, the woman described Meghan as laser-focused on connecting with men who could open doors for her. She claimed Meghan often spoke about getting in the room with the right people and being willing to do whatever it takes to stay there. The comment at the time was dismissed as petty jealousy. But in light of Cory's recent revelations, it's being re-examined under a much harsher lens. Could the man on the other end of that call have been someone Meghan believed could offer her something valuable? An opportunity? A role? A connection? Or was it someone with whom she had unfinished personal business, a private relationship that overlapped with her time with Cory? Both possibilities paint troubling pictures, one of calculated betrayal, the other of dual lives lived in deception. But a third theory is now quietly gaining momentum, that the man may have been linked to Meghan's efforts to gain traction in the UK before she even met Prince Harry. It's no secret that Meghan began visiting the UK more frequently in the year before her royal romance went public. She attended fashion events in London, tried to secure work with British charities, and even sought UK representation. Some now wonder if the man on the screen that night was British, perhaps a connection that predated her relationship with Harry. Was Meghan already setting the stage for her entrance into royal society? Was this video call part of something bigger, a relationship that later helped her secure introductions to elite social circles? No one knows for sure, but it would explain the speed with which Meghan transitioned from actress to duchess. The trajectory, even by celebrity standards, was remarkably fast. Meghan went from living with a Canadian chef to being photographed walking hand in hand with a British royal in less than a year. Most people assumed the romance was whirlwind. But what if it wasn't? What if it had been in motion far earlier, covertly, strategically, behind the scenes? Cory himself, when asked in the podcast if he suspected Meghan was planning her next move while still with him, paused for a long moment. Then he said something chilling in its simplicity. Looking back, I think I was a chapter in a book she was already halfway through writing. That statement has stuck with listeners. It reframes the entire relationship, not as a failed romance, but as a stepping stone. A narrative checkpoint. Something useful at the time, discarded when no longer needed. And so, the man on the screen, whoever he was, becomes more than just a shadowy figure in a laptop call. He becomes symbolic of something far deeper. The untold paths Meghan may have walked to get to where she is now. Was he a confidant? A benefactor? A lover? A recruiter? Each theory leads to a different version of the truth, and each one paints a version of Meghan that diverges wildly from the image she has cultivated since stepping into the global spotlight. One disturbing rumor even suggests that the video call may have been part of a private transaction, something scheduled, rehearsed, and repeated. There are whispers that Meghan had engaged in similar video calls in the past, either for companionship or something more financially motivated. These claims remain unsubstantiated, but they continue to spread, particularly among former acquaintances from Los Angeles who now feel emboldened to speak under anonymity. One former associate claims to have seen Meghan conduct business over video in a way that made him uncomfortable, calling it clearly intimate and clearly prearranged. If any of this is true, it would represent a major threat to the image Meghan has spent years refining, one of empowerment, dignity, and moral clarity. It would also explain her team's deafening silence in response to Cory's podcast. No legal threats, no defamation suits, no strongly worded denials, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes. As the story continues to unfold, the identity of the gentleman caller remains the single greatest mystery. But perhaps even more important than who he is what his presence in that moment represents. To Meghan's critics, he symbolizes manipulation, moral flexibility, and strategic seduction. To her defenders, he may represent a private mistake, a lapse in judgment that should not overshadow the rest of her journey. But to those who lived through the betrayal of Cory and his mother, he is something else entirely. He is the face of a lie that ended a relationship, shattered trust, and left behind a trail of questions that may never be fully answered. For many people, betrayal is an abstract concept, something that happens in stories, in other people's relationships, or in tabloid dramas. But for Cory Vitiello, it became painfully real in his own home, triggered by a quiet sentence spoken by his mother in the dim comfort of their kitchen. That evening, when Joanne Vitiello set her son down and recounted what she had witnessed, everything shifted. Up until that moment, Cory had believed his relationship with Meghan Markle was stable, supportive, and even heading toward long-term commitment. But Joanne's words shattered that illusion with surgical precision. The dinner they had prepared remained untouched on the table. The roasted chicken, the mashed potatoes, the meticulously seasoned vegetables, all now background noise in a room overtaken by tension. Joanne didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply told her son what she had seen with the calm, unwavering honesty of a mother who knew that sugarcoating the truth would only deepen the wound. She explained how she had gone upstairs to tell Meghan dinner was ready and, upon opening the bedroom door, had seen her engaged in an inappropriate video call with another man. Meghan had been partially undressed, seated on Cory's bed, whispering flirtatiously into the screen. At first, Cory thought he had misheard. He asked her to repeat it. Joanne did. Same details, same clarity. No embellishment. No accusations. Just a quiet, heartbreaking account of what had happened. Cory's face, according to those who later saw him that night, went pale. He didn't yell or slam anything. Instead, he fell into silence, frozen, stunned, unable to reconcile the Meghan he knew with the Meghan his mother had just described. Later that evening, he went for a walk. Not a short one. He left the house and wandered the streets for nearly 2 hours, retracing steps he and Meghan had taken together months earlier when they were still in love. Parks they had visited, cafes where they'd shared brunch, street corners where they had laughed under streetlights. And now, with each familiar location, came a new emotion: confusion, disbelief, then anger. Not just at Meghan, but at himself, for not seeing the signs. for trusting so fully, for believing that their connection was something solid when, in hindsight, it may have only been useful. By the time he returned home, the house was quiet. Joanne had gone upstairs. The dishes had been cleared. Meghan, unaware of the conversation that had taken place, was still upstairs, likely assuming the evening would carry on as normal. But Cory wasn't ready to confront her just yet. He went to bed, eyes open in the dark, mind spiraling through every conversation, every missed moment, every late-night phone call that he had previously dismissed. The next morning, the confrontation happened. Meghan was downstairs making tea. Cory entered the kitchen and sat down across from her. He didn't preface with pleasantries or idle chatter. He went straight to the point. He told her what his mother had seen. Meghan froze, teacup in hand, expression unreadable. There was a long silence. Then, almost reflexively, she denied it. She must have misinterpreted it, Meghan allegedly said. It wasn't what it looked like. But Cory didn't flinch. He pressed her. Were you talking to another man in my room, on my laptop, in that way? Meghan, again, tried to deflect. She called the call a conversation with a friend. She claimed it had been blown out of proportion. But when asked why she was half-dressed, why she had locked the door, and why the conversation had clearly sounded intimate from outside the room, her answers began to stumble. Eventually, realizing that denial was no longer effective, Meghan shifted strategies. She framed it as a moment of vulnerability, a mistake. She said she had been feeling disconnected, that she had been lonely, even while living with Cory. It wasn't a justification, she said. It was a moment of weakness. Cory listened. He didn't interrupt. But each word only deepened the pain. This wasn't just about physical betrayal. It was emotional, psychological. A complete violation of trust in the space they had built together. Cory had welcomed Meghan into his life, his home, and his family. He had supported her career, cheered on her ambitions, and protected her from the often harsh glare of media attention. And in return, she had carried on an intimate connection with someone else right under his nose. In the hours following that conversation, the atmosphere in the house changed entirely. Meghan remained on edge, walking through the house like a ghost. Cory, stoic and wounded, avoided prolonged interaction. Joanne, keeping a respectful distance, avoided direct confrontation with Meghan, though the silence between them spoke volumes. It was clear something had broken beyond repair. By the third day, Cory made a decision. He asked Meghan to leave. It wasn't a dramatic ejection. There was no shouting, no threats, no melodrama. Just a firm, quiet request. He told her that, while he appreciated what they had shared, there was no future after what had happened. Meghan, according to close friends, was visibly shaken but didn't fight him. She packed her belongings, clothes, skincare products, stacks of printed scripts, copies of the TIG drafts, and left within 48 hours. And just like that, a relationship that had once been full of promise ended in silence. In the days and weeks that followed, Cory was, by all accounts, a changed man. He went to work, attended charity events, and smiled when needed. But friends say his spirit dimmed. He became more private, less trusting. For a man who had always believed in authenticity and emotional transparency, the betrayal had left a scar that wasn't easily erased. Joanne, too, carried the weight. She blamed herself at times, not for what she saw, but for being the one to reveal it. She had hoped Meghan was the real thing, someone who loved her son for who he was, not what he could offer. But her hope had been misplaced. What made the aftermath even more difficult was the media silence that followed. Meghan, barely weeks after leaving Cory's home, began appearing in public again. She launched new TIG content, attended high-profile events, and was soon linked to even more elite social circles. Her breakup with Cory was never publicly addressed. She never named him in interviews, never acknowledged the pain she had caused, never offered public reflection. Instead, she carefully crafted a new image, a woman of empowerment, ambition, and sophistication. And in the shadows, Cory watched as the woman who had destroyed the foundation of their relationship became a global icon. Cory chose silence for a long time, not because he was afraid, but because he believed in protecting people's privacy, even when they didn't deserve it. He didn't leak photos. He didn't tell friends to go to the press. He simply carried on, knowing that the truth would eventually surface. And when he finally spoke on the podcast, years later, it wasn't revenge. It was release. Listeners were struck not just by the content of his story, but by the way he told it. There was no venom, no bitterness, just sorrow and honesty. He didn't call Meghan names. He didn't speculate about her intentions. He simply described what happened and how it felt to be blindsided by someone he had trusted deeply. His account triggered an avalanche of reactions. Social media exploded. Former colleagues came forward with news stories. People began re-examining old interviews, public appearances, and timelines. And for the first time, a clear fracture appeared in the polished narrative that Meghan had so carefully built. At the heart of it all was a simple truth. No matter how high someone rises, they can't escape the weight of the pain they caused others. Cory's story wasn't a scandal for the sake of gossip. It was a human experience, a portrait of trust broken, love betrayed, and dignity maintained. And for many listeners and viewers, that was the most powerful part. Not the details of the betrayal, but the way Cory handled it. With grace, with honesty, and without spectacle. After Meghan Markle walked out of Cory Vitiello's life and out of his home, something peculiar happened. The world didn't notice. There were no headlines, no breakup interviews, no passive-aggressive social media posts, no behind-the-scenes drama leaked to gossip sites or whispered to tabloid columnists. One day, they were quietly living together in Toronto, and the next, Meghan had vanished from Cory's life and public memory without a trace. It was as though the relationship had never happened at all. This wasn't just strange. It was orchestrated. In the entertainment industry, breakups between high-profile individuals often play out in public. Even couples not actively courting fame usually end up in some blog or magazine, if only for a brief statement or a paparazzi photo. But Cory and Meghan's split defied that norm. It didn't happen organically, it was buried. And the deeper one looks into how it disappeared from public view, the clearer it becomes that there was a deliberate effort to erase it. The question is, who did it, and why? To understand how this vanishing act worked, we have to look at what was happening in Meghan's life at the time. After leaving Cory, Meghan shifted into overdrive. She began rebranding herself at a breathtaking pace. The Tig, once a casual blog with reflections about food and lifestyle, suddenly became a platform for empowerment, influence, and upward mobility. She posted polished photos, sophisticated interviews, and deep reflections about her journey as a biracial woman in media. She began aligning herself with figures in philanthropy, fashion, and international activism. Her public voice took on a new tone. No longer just an actress, she was becoming a movement. But that evolution required something critical: control of the narrative. And to do that, she had to clean up the past. That meant removing any references to relationships that no longer served her story, especially ones that could threaten her image. People who managed Meghan's public relations efforts at the time, some of whom later spoke under anonymity, recall being instructed to tighten the timeline and keep everything aspirational. That meant eliminating confusion, avoiding entanglements with former partners, and ensuring that Meghan's trajectory looked smooth, focused, and drama-free. Cory, no matter how sincere or respectful, didn't fit the new image. He was a chef, a respected one, but not a media magnate or global philanthropist. Their relationship had been based on love and mutual respect, but it didn't offer the leverage Meghan needed in the next phase of her ascent. And perhaps more dangerously, he knew things. Things that, if made public, could call into question the integrity of her carefully constructed public identity. So, the relationship had to disappear. According to insiders, Meghan's team reached out to several online blogs and entertainment writers who had previously covered her relationship with Cory. They asked for updates to be made, articles to be pulled, and language to be softened. The reasoning? Privacy. A desire to move on. Nothing about the sex chat or the breakup was mentioned. Instead, the tone was one of professionalism and discretion. "They're still friends," one email allegedly read. "Let's keep the narrative respectful." Writers complied. Why wouldn't they? Meghan was becoming a big name. She had celebrity friends, her star on Suits was rising, and she was now appearing at industry events with fashion influencers and diplomats. Burning that bridge wasn't worth it. So slowly, and without much fanfare, references to her relationship with Cory began to vanish from the internet. Simultaneously, Meghan began making new connections that helped distance her from that period of her life. She networked with members of Soho House, a private club frequented by artists, entrepreneurs, and royalty-adjacent figures. She attended charity events in London. She partnered with brands that emphasized empowerment and wellness. Her Instagram became more curated, more elite, less Toronto, less real. In private, she also severed many connections. Several friends who had known Meghan during her Toronto years said they were surprised by how quickly she stopped returning calls. Some felt cut off, Others ghosted entirely. One close acquaintance said it was as if she was rebooting her identity and deleting anything that didn't match the new version of herself. For Cory, the silence was deafening. He had spent years building something authentic with Meghan. He had introduced her to his family, welcomed her into his home, and supported her dreams. Yet, after the breakup, there was no closure, no explanation. She was gone, and soon after, she began dating Prince Harry. To the public, this new romance seemed spontaneous, magical even. But insiders have since hinted that Meghan had already been maneuvering toward the British social elite before her relationship with Cory ended. There had been London trips, conversations with connected individuals, even speculation that she had been seeking representation in the UK for months prior. If true, it paints her exit from Cory's life not as a break, but as a transition, and one she had been preparing for long before Joanne Vitiello's shocking discovery. One of the most curious elements of this period is how the press handled the overlap. Typically, when a celebrity enters a royal relationship, the tabloids dig deep. Ex-boyfriends are tracked down. Former colleagues are interviewed. High school teachers offer anecdotes. But in Meghan's case, that didn't happen, not to the extent it usually does. There were whispers about previous relationships, but Cory was largely left out of it. His name barely surfaced in articles about Meghan's past. Some publications even described her as single for years before Harry. That wasn't true. So why was Cory erased? It's likely a combination of factors. First, Cory didn't seek attention. He never went public. He never cashed in on his connection to Meghan. That made him difficult to chase. Second, Meghan's team was proactive. By controlling interviews, locking down quotes, and carefully curating her image, they were able to steer the narrative away from anything inconvenient. And third, by the time Meghan entered the royal orbit, her story had become too big to question. The public wanted a fairy tale, and Cory didn't fit the script. But behind the scenes, efforts to contain the truth continued. According to a journalist who was assigned to write a profile on Meghan shortly after the royal engagement, requests to discuss her Toronto years were met with resistance. When I brought up Cory, I was told not to pursue that line of questioning, the journalist said. They wanted the story to focus on Meghan's philanthropy, her acting career, and her new relationship. Anything else was framed as irrelevant. It wasn't just media control. Social media accounts that mentioned the alleged video call incident were often flagged or shadow banned. Posts discussing Cory and Meghan's breakup were mysteriously buried in search results. Independent blogs that published speculation about their relationship found their traffic throttled or their pages taken down due to copyright complaints or vague violations. This digital erasure, coupled with Meghan's strategic silence, created a vacuum where only one version of the story survived, hers. But as time passed, cracks began to form. People started asking questions. Why did Meghan leap from Cory to Prince Harry so quickly? Why was Cory never acknowledged? What happened during those final weeks in Toronto? And now, with Cory's podcast appearance, the floodgates have opened. What's striking about his account is how consistent it is with the details long whispered among those who knew them. The sex chat incident, the calm confrontation, the sudden exit, the public silence. It all fits. And it explains why the breakup wasn't just quiet, it was deliberately hidden. Today, as people revisit Meghan's past, they're beginning to see that the story she presented to the world was heavily curated. Not entirely false, but not entirely true either. And at the center of that careful curation was a man who never asked to be famous. A man who loved her, trusted her, and was left behind without a second glance. This isn't just about a breakup. It's about control. About how stories are shaped, how truths are buried, and how power is maintained by deciding which chapters of a life are allowed to exist in public memory. For years, Cory's chapter was scrubbed out. But now, with the truth out in the open, that chapter has returned, and it refuses to be ignored. For some, the account shared by Cory Vitiello could be written off as a one-time misstep, an isolated lapse in judgment between two people growing apart. But in the days following Cory's shocking podcast appearance, new claims began to surface, quietly at first, then more openly. Whispers turned into accounts, and accounts started to draw eerie similarities. Patterns began to emerge. And the question that slowly formed in the minds of listeners, readers, and those closest to Meghan Markle during her pre-royal years was this really a one-off event? Or was it part of a larger, recurring pattern? One of the first to come forward, albeit anonymously, was a man from Meghan's early days in Los Angeles. He was not a celebrity. not a high-powered executive, just a young writer and marketing consultant who worked in close proximity to several indie film sets and event planning circles. In an interview with an online podcast